This conference will now be recorded.
Good evening and welcome to the October 26, 2020 meeting of the Norwood Finance Commission. This meeting is being recorded for viewing by Norwood Community Media. Information on how to access our meetings is posted on the town's website. Just as a reminder to everybody who's in the meeting, if you could mute your mics so that we don't have a lot of feedback, and certainly unmic yourself when you are want to make a comment. I see that we have a quorum of finance commissioners attending this meeting, and I will call the roll call for attendance, and then we'll welcome other attendees to tonight's meeting. So for attendance, Ann Haley.
Here. Here?
You're Ann, you're here. Julie
Yes.
Langone.
Here.
Alan Slater.
Here.
And Kelly Newmy.
Here.
And the chair, Robert Donnelly, is also in attendance. I'm going to now just recognize all of our folks that are on the call with us, and welcome to you all. I see Emily Chambers is here, Mark Good. We have Dr. Dave Thompson. I see we have David Hajar, Tony Mizuko, Maya Bodenhofer, Teresa Stewart, Kathy Carney, and Bernie Cooper. So welcome to you all as well. Did I miss anybody? Very good. All right. The first order of business, I'm going to suggest that on the agenda we have for tonight, first order of business is approval of the minutes, but the minutes are incomplete at this time. So if it's okay with the commission, we will present the meeting minutes for approval. These are the minutes from October 14th meeting. We'll present those meeting minutes at our next meeting for approval. And with that, that takes us to our second agenda item. Actually, the second agenda item, all the other agenda items sort of relate to it as well. So the order of business now is the upcoming special town meeting articles, associated motions, related votes, and discussion for the special town meeting articles. I thought that perhaps the way that we could talk through these articles for the special town meeting is if I don't know if Emily or Tony, do you have the ability to perhaps put on screen the draft list of articles and amounts that was distributed with the meeting?
We do. Do you want to do the full list, Mr. Chairman, or would you like sort of the shortened one that just has the financial items on it?
It's the shorter one is fine. That will have us focus on the financial implications.
All right. If you want to give me just a second here. All right. I do have additional documents as we go through. So this, if everyone can see on their screen, is sort of a draft version of the pink sheet or what we would send out for the FinCom. These are the articles with an appropriation. So we can take it in whatever order you would like, Mr. Chair. My recommendation would be starting with the second town meeting Article 1 as that relates to the school budget, and then the hybrid funding. That way, if they so wanted to, we could have the folks from the school committee and Dr. Thompson head out after that, or they of course could stay with us as we discuss all of these items in detail, but it's your call.
That's fine with me. Is that okay with the other commissioners? Seeing so, we'll do that. Well, why don't we start with town meeting number 2. The first article on that list is the application of free cash to offset the tax rate. And Tony, you can speak to this, but this particular article is associated with the use of free cash to offset, as I understand it, the reductions in state aid and local receipts that we had expected due to the element of pandemic and other associated crises that we have been dealing with this year.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. We were fortunate compared to most communities in terms of overall revenue loss, and our state aid still factored in better than anticipated. It was not what we had thought we were going to get in February. However, if we had gotten this amount, we would have still been just as happy because it's a fairly sizable increase in state aid. So absent the hybrid model, all that's required to offset the budget there is $618,000. And that'll have us with a balanced budget that will allow us to set the tax rate. And the fund balance deposits we had discussed earlier in the year, which is $500,000 in the state $400,000 into stabilization, our normal stabilization deposit, $500,000 for the pension catch-up, as well as $750,000, which is ahead of schedule, into override stabilization. We would still be making all of those. So still putting us in a good financial position for FY22 and beyond.
I see Kelly has a question, and then Judy.
So that makes complete sense to me, Tony. One question: of the 618,000 some odd dollars, is any of this being reimbursed out of the grants that we're receiving from the state for additional COVID issues that towns are having, or is this an additional amount of money we need in addition to what the state is giving us for COVID?
So I would call it an addition. This is to balance the budget. Our expenses are the same. Our revenues have been reduced by this amount. So this is money in to balance those revenues.
Okay, fair.
Offset revenue loss is the easiest way to think of it.
Yep, got it. Fair.
Judy,
Thank you.
please. Thank you. Thank you, Kelly.
Judy, you're muted.
You're still muted.
Sorry. We'll be using a little over $1.3 million in free cash. What is the total as of this night
So there's
of free cash?
from our auditors are anticipating $8.5 million is will be the free cash number. We don't have our free cash certification yet. We're still hopeful we'll have it by the 12th. However, the state law, the changes the state made as a result of COVID last year allows us to balance this budget and to use money into the fall. If we had a resulting fund balance or remaining fund balance at the end of last fiscal year, at least equal to cover it, which we did. Our remaining free cash number is more than enough to cover this. So if we didn't have our certified number from the state in time, we'd be able to cover it with just what was remaining, if you will, from last year. But our auditors, our number was 8.5 million. That's a conservative number. The auditors agree with us, and they're just finalizing the paperwork to submit it to the state.
So at this moment, we expect to have $8.5 million, and will we be waiting for it to get certified in the future, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And we are drawing advance onto that with these decisions tonight of 1.364. Correct?
The total is a little over $2 million.
$2,073,271.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay.
Are there any other questions from the commission? A question for the commission. Do you folks want to just go through these items totally and come back for votes, or do you want to initiate a vote on them as we go through them? What's the preference? Ann?
I would like to come back and vote.
All right, let's go through them and we'll come back to each for appropriate action. All right, the next item is school department. This is the hybrid education funding. This is also from free cash in the amount of $158, excuse me. So again, these this is the I think the dollar, we had discussed this at the last meeting. I think the only change here is that the 300,000 that was on the chart for last time, we have now included the 381 as part of the 746 158. Any comments from anyone here, school committee or general government, before we go to the commission?
If I could just, Mr. Chairman, just to jump in, you are correct. It is the amount requested by the school department, as well as I know the Finance Commission is aware of this, but just running at home, it is the amount of the hybrid model, as well as the remote learning option, which is an unfunded mandate from the state, but something we have to do. This also covers the full benefits and overhead cost of that. And it's in addition to the $1 million or so the school department has freed up in their budget. So this is the additional appropriation needed to cover that total amount. And it does include the full benefit costs and our overhead costs. They're subject to fluctuation. They could go up or down, but we feel confident with the numbers that are there.
Yes. Okay. Comments from the commission? Ann?
I just want to make sure that everybody realizes that we should set an appointment for a meeting before the town meeting, the same night as town meeting. So just in case something does happen, COVID related or anything, that the schools and general government are aware. Obviously, they've done it before, but I just want to remind everybody that we should have the meeting opened so that if there is any changes, they can come in and make them. That's it.
Okay. Yes, Tony.
I agree wholeheartedly with Ms. Haley on that, especially because we know that the actual elevator number, the bids will come in on the day of town meeting. So we'll have an actual final number for that. And we'll likely have a few frustrating small bills in the amount of a couple $100. So I think that would be a wise decision.
Okay, I've made a note that we will plan for a pre-town meeting for the first night, which is scheduled for November the 12th. So I made that note and we will do that, Ann. And, Judy, do you have a question? I saw somebody's hand.
Not at this point.
Okay. Anyone else on the hybrid educational costs? All right, let's proceed to the next one.
Excuse me, Bob. Excuse me.
Yes.
It's 746,158. That's not totally hybrid, isn't it? Was there's other items in there, Tony?
Well, it depends on how you want to look at it. The school department had to come up with extra costs for the hybrid model. They also had to come up with extra costs for the remote learning academy, which the state's requiring us to do. So these are the total additional dollars required to allow the school department to operate this year. They've reallocated upwards of $1 million in their budget already. So think of these as these are additional dollars to balance for the year. Had COVID not happened, this number would be 0.
Okay.
Yes, Alan. Mr. Slater.
Thank you, Bob. For the purposes of, going over the capital outlay and having representatives from the school committee and the school department here, can I suggest that maybe we concentrate when we do capital right now and maybe the items that impact the school so that, maybe we can take a vote on, 1, 2, and capital items related to the schools, and they could, leave and do their thing rather than have them stay for the whole meeting or a good part of the meeting.
If that's acceptable to the commission, we can proceed that way. With
That would be
that,
fine.
okay, so we'll put on the table right now a vote specific to the first item we discussed, which is the application of free cash to offset the tax rate in the amount of $618,232, the funding source being free cash. I'll entertain a motion on that.
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a second? And
Second.
seconded? Okay,
I'm a little confused. We first said that we weren't going to vote on things. Now we're voting on things. And Alan, I thought you wanted just to have discussion with the school department here. So,
Well, what my question was my comment was that, rather than have the school people stay for all the items that we have, why don't we just do the items related to the schools? Maybe we can take a vote on those and then we can release them and, they can do their own thing
Okay.
rather than stay for the whole thing.
okay, so you want to take a vote on the ones for the school? Okay, good, cool, thank you.
Vote and discussion, whatever.
Thanks.
so the motion has been made, and I still need a second. Ann had a question, so I need a
I'll
second.
second it. I'll second it.
Any further discussion? With that, for the vote, take the roll call. This is for the free cash offset to the tax rate. Ann Haley,
Aye.
Judy Langone,
Yes.
Alan Slater,
Yes.
Kelly Numi,
Yes, and Bob, I just want to let you know I turned my video off because I'm losing connection when I have my video on, just so you know.
All right. Thank you, Kelly. And the chair votes yes as well. So that's 5-0 vote for that particular item, free cash to offset the tax rate. We have discussed the second item, which is the school department hybrid education funding in the amount of $746,158. The funding source is free cash. Do I have a motion for that article?
I'll make a motion for that.
Second.
All right, we have a second discussion on the article. Very well, we'll go to roll call. Ann Haley,
Aye.
Alan Slater,
Yes.
Judy Langone,
Yes,
Kelly Numi,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes as well. So that's a 5-0 vote for that article. Very well. So with that, we can now get into the discussion regarding the third item on the agenda for the second town meeting, the capital outlay associated with the capital improvement plan and the capital outlay associated with the infrastructure improvement plan. Tony, you have put up on the screen, these are the spending items associated with the capital outlay, correct?
That's correct. This is actually the forms for motions as prepared for and by bond counsel. So I figure this is probably the easiest list if we just want to go through item by item. I can do it either way you'd like. I can go through the school specific items and then we can see if there's no more questions on those and then just sort of list the item, give a quick description, and then go through everything and then talk a little bit about borrowing and debt service and then open it up to the commission, whatever the commission wants.
I think that's fine. I should have mentioned that the dollar amount is $7,543,000. $7,543,000. The funding source here would be borrowing. So yes, Tony, if you could just take us through the major components of the of this motion, and then we'll proceed to discussion.
Okay, would you like to, I guess I'll start at the top with the proposal to borrow more than we typically do. If everyone remembers last year, one of our ideas to maintain liquidity was to borrow this year for just about all of our capital and possibly next year to maintain free cash. It's one of the things that's allowed us by pushing capital off as well to have the free cash balance that we have. So we're certainly borrowing more for ordinary projects than we would in a normal year. And Mr. Slater and I were talking, I always get frustrated when we borrow for small things like vehicles we should be paying cash. But the idea behind borrowing this year was to maintain that cash to give us maximum flexibility to see where the state's FY21 budget went, where the economy went. Certainly the election next week will have an impact one way or another on the economy. And then we're going to want to see where the state is in FY22. Once we're able to settle our FY22 budget, we'll largely be back to what I would call normal. If you remember back to, it feels like 100 years ago, pre-COVID, we looked at a budget where we were going to be doing probably $2.5 or $2.7 million in cash for free capital, which is a lot more than we've historically done, which would have been great. I think we can get back to that. Trending out our analysis over the next few years to see if we're going to hit over that 5% of debt service. It is on the one hand possible that it might happen in FY23, the key there being Forbes Hill. Forbes Hill accounting for 18 to 20% of that total amount of debt service we're eligible to acquire or eligible to spend under our financial policies. So a couple of options with that would be that we could continue to pay that if we unfortunately continue to own the property out of free cash. That's always an option. But my anticipation, and we'll go over a couple of the other debt service numbers in a moment, is that for FY23 and 24, we would go back to trying to use more cash for capital and probably do heavier cash for capital years to balance out the heavier borrowing once things have normalized. I can tell you right now, if this was a normal year, we were sitting on $8.5 million in capital in free cash, and we had a $7 million capital plan, we would do no borrowing. So this year, rates are low. We are trying to preserve our cash. We'll see where we are. We'll probably be moving capital to the fall in the future. That's one of the things that the capital outlay has discussed, and I believe the selectmen have discussed as well, that might work better for us for a lot of different reasons. Now, in terms of the concern over the debt service payment in outer years, I want to show a few things. I'm sure everyone can read this very detailed list here, but see if I can give you an example. The FY21 number for debt service ends up being an actual number, and that FY22 number is projected that, again, with a conservative rate, projected that we borrow everything, and we borrow everything right at the start of the year for the full amount. That doesn't actually usually happen. When we undertake a project, I mean, a vehicle, usually if it's a $40,000 vehicle, you borrow the cost of the vehicle, and then you go out and purchase it. But larger bonds, we tend to borrow in groupings as the projects get completed. And just because we have an authorization, when we project the budget, we project that we're making the debt service payment, but in reality, we may end up not. And there's a couple examples of that on here. I know this is a little tough to see, but the Dean Street Bridge repair, we had to get the borrowing authorization for the full amount. Once that project is settled out, that was largely covered by grant funding. Another example is some of the LED light upgrades at the police and fire department, as well as the library. There's about $150,000 to $180,000 of debt service between those three projects. Because of the work of our energy manager and the facilities department and some green communities money, we expect to probably only need about $30,000 or $40,000 of that. So while we project that debt service out, once the project is finalized and closed and we know whether we've borrowed and whether we've borrowed the full amount, that ends up getting closed out. That debt service either becomes available to apply somewhere else, or if we haven't borrowed the full amount, depending on the size of the project, we simply don't borrow it. The kitchen is an example of that as well, where we're projecting the full $450,000. We anticipate being able, using our new facilities department, to bring that project in cheaper. We're cautious and we want to make sure we have the funds available for it, but we wouldn't on July 1st all of a sudden borrow $450,000 and having it sitting there for that project. It's an authorization until we actually go ahead and issue the project. Another example is probably the Coakley Middle School design. I don't know if we've spent down much of that yet, but we carry that projection as a need, although that one is certainly, if we haven't begun spending down, will be coming up closely. So when we look at some of these numbers, that FY22 number shows that jump, but again, that's always a jump to the worst case scenario, if you will. Granted, rates could always come in at different areas. And as I said, my assumption would be once we return to the new normal, we would go back to paying more cash for capital items and probably have a year or two where we would want to do more than normal and reduce the borrowing, especially if we've held on to that cash and it's still there. If you want, Mr. Chair, I'll pause there if there's any questions about overall where we're going, and then we can go into project specific.
Questions from the commission? I see Ann. Yes?
Yes, actually, I have a question for you. And I think it might be more towards Mark. When we go out to borrow, and we have a fairly large list this year of all of the different things we're going to borrow. So you borrow at different times, am I correct? You lump a bunch of things together and go out and borrow, am I correct, Mark?
Yeah, so we'll take a look at all those projects and kind of talk to the department heads and, see what's needed. It may not, as Tony said, it may not be needed all at once, but we'll try to borrow as much as we can up front.
So each time we go to borrow, are we charged, I'm going to call it an administrative fee, a fee to that is upfront and not included in the borrowing itself?
Well, yes, there are issuance costs involved, but where these are premium bonds, for the most part, the premium is paying for any issuance cost.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. But we keep that in mind, and that's why we try to, we want to, if we can do it all at once, we'll do it all at once and save that cost. But for the most part, it's cost being paid through the premium.
Okay. Thank you.
Judy, you had your hand up, and then Alan.
Yeah, and probably this is Mark's question. I mean, there are many items on here, and you're looking for an authorization to put a put it aside and do the project when we need to do it. Mark, are you planning, or have you asked or even broke it down to maybe doing a band on this rather than borrowing it all or in piecemeal? And would it be cheaper with the administrative costs? Or, I mean, it seems to me that with so many items on here, it's going to be pretty active, the borrowing process.
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting time because you have 20-year loans going for 1.5 to 1.8%. You're on your year notes, they're at 0.8. Money's cheap. So, I was talking to our financial advisor the other day. I was like, well, what do we want to do with this? Do we want to do it on a short term, or do we want to borrow it, to bond it long term all at once? And I guess the answer is, well, we'll know when we get there. The danger is that you borrow it all up front and then your costs come in under budget. So then you have some additional money left over. Well, the easiest thing to do there is to apply it to another project. So there's a lot here. It makes sense to borrow, to bond it long term now. On the other hand, you've got these projects that are in flux. And the costs aren't fixed. So right now, I'm leaning towards borrowing it all at once. But again, once we get this authorized, there's going to be some planning involved. We may not get around to it till next spring, early winter. It's just going to depend on how the department heads plan it, get it ready to go, and are ready to borrow. So there's a lot in play.
So if we do all these things and we had a large authorized item, what you're saying is we have money left over and then we can proceed to do other projects. And Tony, maybe you could answer that. Would we then have to go before town meeting to add additional projects to the extra money that's left over?
Well, yes, but I wouldn't call it adding. So let's say we go to borrow $7.5 million, and we only need $6.5 million, but we've already authorized that borrowing. We have the flexibility to then move it to, I would say, another project. So maybe the next year when we say, all right, we got to borrow $4 million. No, it's only 3.5 because we've got those funds to be able to move around.
And that would require town meeting approval.
So, but we've never really done something like this before, correct? I mean, we did it maybe a little mini way, but this is quite a large list, multiple pages of items, some of which are small, some of them which is large, and we think this is how much money, and we would like an upfront authorization and a nice big bucket of money at a low borrowing cost. But again, I think we might look pretty foolish if we go out and borrow this $7.3 million or $7.5 million, whatever it is. And then as we're marching along, good management and so forth, we've got a lot of money left over. I mean, that can happen, correct, Tony?
Absolutely. That's a problem, but it's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
It just means you borrow less in a future date. I'd love to say our projects are always going to come in under budget. I think the history of going back to town meeting for projects usually shows that's generally not always the case. But remember that to sign a contract, we need a full authorization. So the Meadowbrook sewer relining is an example of a project that's going to take a while. That's going to take 18 months to 2 years. That contract may come in after engineering and design at $1.7 million, and then there's always some flux there. We need that $1.7 million after we spent engineering money to sign that contract. The actual drawdown may go over 6 months, a year, 18 months. And at the very end, it may come in that it's under. Now, borrowings generally don't turn into free cash, except if you borrow $40,000 for a vehicle and it's $39,000, 815 is what you spend. Sure, the cents and the pennies roll up to free cash, but usually it's the auditors let you do a de minimis amount under 100 or under $1,000.
But we won't necessarily be borrowing this all at one time. For example, we'll have some notes coming due in June, and we'll have to consider, rolling those or bonding them. At that time, we can think about or ask our department heads what's ready to go. And we'll only borrow for those projects where there is a plan, where there's good numbers. And so we don't necessarily have to borrow it all at once.
So we could borrow with the using bands if we wanted to.
We can borrow using bands, and then have it all come together and do a one big bond. We'll just have to play it by ear, and as we're ready to borrow, we say to department heads, okay, is this project ready to go? Is this project ready to go? And then we can borrow accordingly. So it doesn't have to be the 7.5 million bing, bang, boom. We can just spread that out over a need, really.
Well, as you say, there's some options there, and I'm sure that, town meeting will, ask a lot of questions too. I see no problem with it. I mean, it's just going to be very tricky in how you do it and what pieces to borrow, whether it's bands, whether it's, all of that. So we'll leave that up to you experts.
Alan had a question or a comment.
I did a couple of things, Bob. Excuse me. First to Mark Good. Given the cost of money these days, do you expect a significant bond premium when everything is said and done?
Well, that's the interesting thing now. I mean, so our interest costs are 3 to 5%, but with the bond premium, which are significant, it drops that back down to the 1.5%. So the bond premiums are rather interesting. On our last issue, we got 1.4 million in a bond premium. So the premiums are significant, yes.
Yeah, and that'll allow us to basically buy back a portion of the bonding for those particular projects, which in the long term will save us money.
That's right.
Yeah, good. My second actually comment, it's something that Mr. Mizuko alluded to, is when I did have a discussion with him on capital costs. I mean, my main concern was very simple, is that I didn't want to accumulate so much debt that it would become an issue down the road when it comes down to funding general government and school budgets, because as you know, every dollar of debt that we pay is a dollar less for the schools and for general government. And Tony explained to me that this is an unusual year. We are going to be borrowing more than we typically do. I understand that. I think again in subsequent years we have to be very careful with how much we do spend on new debt, and assuming that we do have significant amounts of free cash available, is that we should use as much free cash as we can to finance some of those other improvements, rather than accumulate debt. Again, it's going to really depend on the particular situations in a given year, but I think we should begin watching carefully how much debt we accumulate, given what we know. We are going to have to go back for debt on types of things that can't be funded from free cash. So I think it's an exercise that Tony and Mark Good and Tom McQuaid are going to have to be doing the next couple of years, just to make sure that our debt service remains at the levels that they are. I mean, Forbes Hill notwithstanding, and doesn't present a problem or cause us to have a reduction in services either in general government or the town side. So Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Yeah, to the point Alan just made, agreed. So, Tony, you made reference to our financial policy of the maximum allowed under financial policy for debt is 5% of operating revenues. So we distributed to the commission the current state, which has us about 3.69%. So as another metric for kind of looking at, that debt accumulation as it relates to our operating budget, I would expect probably our 3.69% would go up a little bit given what we're doing this year. But perhaps that's an opportunity for us as we go forward in the subsequent months to just keep an eye on that metric to just see, does it continue to tail upward, or do we, just a metric that we can use to help us just take a look at returning, we start returning to the use of free cash for some of our capital items as opposed to borrowing. That may be a metric we can keep an eye on to see if it changes significantly. Are there any other questions? Kelly.
Mr. Slater, can I ask you just a follow-up question to that?
Sure.
So I know in our financial policies, we both want to maintain a certain level of reserves, and we also want to be below a certain threshold of borrowing, right? Which ultimately is worse if you don't meet it? Like, is it worse to have too much borrowing or worse to have too few reserves?
Too few reserves, 10-1, too few reserves.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
I mean, many times the bonding companies will look at what you borrow to make sure that you're maintaining an infrastructure in your town. So you generally will have some borrowing, but on the other hand, you don't want to have too much borrowing either because it just takes away from other things.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Appreciate that.
I think if everyone remembers, a couple of years ago, we tried to put some cash into the budget to apply to the capital plan every year, and it became very confusing at town meeting, and we've just never done it since. But if we ever had that opportunity again, having some cash available for the capital plan every year, plus free cash, plus borrowing when necessary, would be a good thing. And the goal, I think, to Mr. Slater's point, is to always stay enough below your upper limit. That way, when an opportunity presents itself, you can then act on that opportunity. If it's something that comes up, whether that's not necessarily planned, that you can say, hey, we do have an opportunity to acquire a piece of property or do something that comes up and that's important. You want some flexibility. If you're maxed out for too long, you're going to miss out on the opportunity.
Very good. Are there any other questions or comments from the commission or other attendees? Seeing none, are we at a point now where we can take a formal vote for the capital outlay, capital improvement plan?
I
And
would say,
I do have some comments. I thought you were talking about comments on further conversation about what we were just doing. I do have a couple of comments on the capital improvement plan, some changes that I would like to see made if we can. May I, Bob?
go right ahead, Ann.
Okay. All right. So I went through this. I went and I looked up our policy on capital improvement, and and I understand, and I actually approve of the plan the way it is, but there's just a few little tweaks that I'd like to make. And the little tweaks that I'd like to make add up to probably immediately, I don't know whether it was $138,000 or $148,000. The optics is very important, I would say, when we're talking about our financial status and how we're doing. And it bothers me that we are borrowing on $20,000 for the cemetery roof. I got a list. Let's see, 20, $5,000 for a design, and that's one I have a question about, the design for the carpet replacement. And I think that's in the public safety building. What is that? Why do we have to have a design for carpet replacement?
So given different OSHA and other requirements, you actually have to have somebody come in and design exactly what's going in. They have to make sure that your bid specs are specifying, because remember, sometimes for us, design is putting in the proper bid specs. We have to specify specifically the type of carpet, the type of fiber, the square footage, the manner in which it's to be installed. It's a little bit more complicated in a public safety building. We have to specify that we want the whatever it is, POC glue, or whatever is the glue that's the high smell glue. All of these details have to go into a proper bid document for us to be able to actually go out to bid and design what we're getting in. It's far more complicated than just, and I've made this mistake in the past, just saying, well, I've got 27,000 square feet. I need 25,000 square feet of 27,000 square feet of material. You actually have to have very specific, very detailed bid docs prepared by a designer or a firm to actually make sure the final product that you get is exactly what you need.
Okay, I'll take that one off my list. Apparatus, apron, parking lot, $10,000. Really, it just doesn't, it doesn't fit with our capital plan. I mean, we talk about a big number in the capital plan, but we also said, we don't want to spend more money on something than it's worth and its length of, service to us. So, okay. So let's see. Then there was another one, $3,000 for post-construction monitoring for a taxiway down at the airport. Why is $3,000 in our capital budget?
There's a couple.
I'll go for one more minute and then you can talk about them. But $15,000 for the environmental assessment for the taxiway. Let's see. Okay. And then I'll finish up with, there's a couple of things that I don't think we need. I was looking at all of the DPW trucks and I'm wondering, and I tried looking at the original capital outlay things in the actual budget book. And I think we're a little heavy on that replacement there, but in fact, I thought I found one that was supposed to be replaced next year in this list. I may have been misunderstanding that. The cemetery trucks, actually it was the cemetery trucks. We have 3 cemetery trucks in here. And in the original capital outlay plan, we only had 2. One of them was supposed to be, I believe, replaced next year. And I think that we might be able to take a look at the replacement of the 3 vehicles for the recreation department, and I think maybe just bring that down to 2 from reading what I did. That's my comment on the capital outlay plan. Thank you.
Good comments. A couple of points. One, on some of the smaller amounts, there's 2 things to remember. One of them being the idea, and this is what the Finance Commission endorsed, was to borrow for the capital plan for fiscal 21. So we just said, if it's in the capital plan, borrow for it. If we started saying, and I agree with you, there's some things in here I would rather pay cash for, even a small amount. But if we start getting into that, it becomes, well, what's the cutoff and what do we want to do? And capital outlay approve the borrowing. So the idea was, this year we're going to borrow. And there's 2 ways you can look at it. You can say, gee, we're borrowing this little amount of money for this little item over here. Or from a financial perspective, the way our auditors will look at it, the way our financial advisors will look at it is, you borrowed $7.5 million. Yes, some of these items are smaller. To the larger point about what goes in the capital plan, one of the changes we made a few years ago was sort of twofold. One is, a vehicle is not a large capital investment for the town, one singular vehicle. But on average, to maintain our fleet as a whole, that's between $500,000 and a $700,000 investment annually, not counting buying a fire truck. Those given years, it ends up doubling. So our fleet, as one asset that we own, requires $700,000 of investment every year, or whatever that number happens to be. So to sort of squirrel things off in here or there, I think then you're defeating the purpose of making sure we're looking at it comprehensively. The same thing with facilities. We would say, if I said to the Finance Commission, I would like to borrow, $800,000 for a town hall project, wouldn't that be nice? You might say, well, we're really going to look into this. But if I keep hitting you with $70,000 projects a year, it starts to fall below the radar, and we're not getting an idea of what our actual capital investment is for our whole facilities. Now, when we return to paying cash for items next year or the subsequent year, I think there's certainly a value in saying, listen, we categorically are just not going to borrow for something under a certain dollar threshold. I think that makes sense. Whether it's $50,000 or $100,000, we should be able to generally come up with enough free cash for those items. Some of the design money that we have is because our budget is actually very trim on any kind of engineering and design money. I'm hopeful that once we sort of get the facilities department up and running after a few years, we can at some point create in their budget enough flexibility that they can do a lot of the initial design, that they can call a designer and say, hey, can you at least get us sort of preliminary design or 10 or 20% done without having to go to borrow money to do that. That way, if we're borrowing money, it's really in anticipation of a almost certain construction project. The last town I worked in, which had, excluding schools, a municipal operating budget of $9.5 million, I had $160,000 a year for engineering and design. I mean, that's how you get any project done. One of the other reasons you see some of those smaller engineering and design amounts is we've started programming into the budget, and I agree it's obnoxious to borrow for them on a small amount. So that way we were getting better estimates and bid-ready documents rather than doing what the town has done several times where we say, well, we need $600,000 for this project, sort of all in, and then we actually pay to start designing it and doing the investigation and the analysis. And then all of a sudden we realize we were completely wrong and the numbers are way off. So doing that design ahead of time gives us that ability to make sure that we're certain. And I agree 100%. I would like that to return to cash when the time is appropriate. I also, again, I agree with some of the smaller projects. Normally we would just pay cash for them. But this year, the idea was borrow for everything, hold on to the cash, see what happens with FY21 state budget, which we've seen, the election, and then FY22. To two specific concerns with the recreation vehicles, we're actually just replacing 2 rec vehicles with 2 rec vehicles. One of them was part of a regular rotation replacement. The other rec vehicle was destroyed in the June 28th storm. So it's a 2 for a 2, but they're down to just 1 vehicle at the moment. The DPW trucks, there was a swap in the fleet. A vehicle that was scheduled to be replaced next year ended up having a substantial damage to it and has to get replaced out this year. And we are moving towards 1 person per vehicle in the DPW fleet. That's something that caused us a little bit of trouble when we hit COVID, that we're not able to separate out and have a work vehicle for each of our workers. That also means that we don't have spare vehicles, which we still don't. They sometimes hold on to a vehicle, but I can tell you a typical DPW pickup truck or a 1-ton, once they've cycled through to the end of their life, sometimes if you get a decent one, it can become a tool truck or something like that. But most of the time, they hit their 8-10 years and they are toast after 8 or 10 years of use. So it is an increase in the size of the DPW fleet. We'll be upfront about that. It definitely is. But it's designed to make sure that we have 1 vehicle for each member of the crew to be able to take out, which is likely to be a requirement going forward. It is good planning. We could always just sort of try to get away with it, stick 2 folks in 1 vehicle and have it not be too large of a problem. But your larger point about smaller items and borrowing, I agree completely. This is a little bit of an odd year.
Alan, then Judy. Unmute Alan.
I know a lot of people would prefer that I stay on mute forever, but that's a whole other story. Just a minor comment on one item, and that goes back to the crack ceiling at the public safety building. I mean, the apron there is in really bad shape, I think. Is it worth it to do crack sealing, or is it worth it just to totally replace it?
So there's 2 things there. That whole lot, as well as the apron, needs to be replaced and resurfaced. The whole lot, as well as the apron, is in rough shape. We've done some patches to try to keep it going. That'll let us sort of get a skim coat over the apron, which is sort of the critical piece. But I think in 4 years, we have the whole lot scheduled to be done, and that will be the lot and the apron. And I'm glad you brought that up, because the apparatus floor is suffering some issues where it's popping up a little bit, and because it's designed to hold the weight of the trucks, it's a little bit more complicated than just sort of any other garage we might have. So that design money there is money for an engineer to come in and actually look at it, look at the challenges with it, what the weight balances need to be, and how you fix it. That's not as simple as just sort of putting a floor in. It's connected into the Plimo vent system and the grease retrieval or the fluids retrieval system. So it's a complicated floor. The whole
Is it-
upper apparatus and inner floor needs some work. That building is starting to age quite a bit, and it is not aging gracefully.
Is that floor also potentially, you know, a groundwater problem? You know, high groundwater at all?
I don't think so.
Okay. So it isn't like the groundwater is causing the floor to pop up, which I've seen
No,
in other projects.
No, we're fairly certain it just has to do with the original design and construction of the building.
Okay.
And I'll also, I don't know why this happens anywhere in the country. Fire stations are designed and built, and trucks just get bigger every generation. So trucks and ambulances are bigger than they were 20 years ago. 20
Yep.
years ago, was designed and built for what was the biggest then. Every town I've worked in has had a fire department where it's, gee, our bay barely fits or wasn't designed for what we have today. And I wish they would just start making smaller and lighter vehicles. But
Judy, then David.
Yeah, this question goes back to the bonding. And I should have asked it before, but the discussion that just went on just got my mind turning here. Mark, you said if you go out to bond, many of these items you wouldn't be more than 3 to 5 years, or would this whole thing go out as a packet and we would bond it for 15 or 20 years, but there's a lot of small things in between? How does that work?
So equipment, for example, is statutory, it's 5 years or the life of the equipment. The parking lots, paving roads, I believe is 10 to 15 years. The water project, it has a life. It's not on this group, but the next group, the infrastructure group, the 4.8 million, that has a 30-year life. So it's really bound either by statute or the life of the equipment or whatever you're borrowing for. So
Yeah,
if you see, if you look at the structure of our bonds, you'll see some 5 years projects of equipment maturing. You'll see other projects. You got a 550,000 on the screen here for your ambulance replacement. The life of that nowadays is 10 years. So you could go out 10 years on that, et cetera.
so you'll have to do multiple bonds depending on the equipment and how long you're given to bond it. I mean, it just seems to me like it'd be
No, it's
very
all one
detailed.
bond, all one bond with different maturities for each of the various projects or equipment that's you're borrowing for. So your general obligation bond is going to be made up of 5-year equipment or 20-year construction projects. And you do it all at once.
And there's not multiple costs for doing the various different ones? I think Ann was getting to that earlier.
There is issuance cost anytime you go out for a note or a bond.
Okay,
But again, nowadays that's being covered by the premium. If it's not covered by the premium, you can also include it with the cost of the project. Although I have found that the departments, the planners don't factor that in. So you end up scrambling to get your issuance costs covered if you don't get it paid by a premium. So premiums are a great way of paying your issuance costs.
okay, I know I'm getting into the woods a little bit here, so I'll back off. Thank you, Mark.
David, you had a question or a comment, I believe.
Well, I just wanted to follow up with what Tony said about to Alan about the floor in the fire department building. So one of the things that was done, Alan, unfortunately, what engineered out of the project were floor drains. And I think what you're getting is a lot of frost buildup or cold, hot and cold. There's no place for that water to go. It sits there. It shouldn't have been done at the time. I'm sure they thought they were making a good decision, but as it turns out, there's no place for the water to go, and it sits there. And as anyone knows about buildings, water that's sitting there freezes, thaws. It's going to create a problem, and that's what you're seeing there. So,
Thank you, David. I mean, I've seen buildings where water problems are terrible, and from what Tony described, it seemed as if part of the problem was water related. So, thank you.
I think Ann had her hand up early. Ann, do you still have a question or a comment, or did I?
Just for my education, another question to Mark, I'm sorry. So when we have the things like the design things that we have in this list, what do they come under? Like, how long can we borrow for that? Or is that
Designs are interesting because it's 5 years, but if the project is approved, then it's as long as you can borrow for the project. So for the most part, our design projects can go for up to 20 or 30 years.
Okay.
But again, looking at that design dollar amount, we can look at that and say, okay, it's best for the investors if we do this out 5 years, or the dollar amount is such that we'll do it out 10 years. It doesn't have to be 20 years. If it's a large amount, we can go out 20. If it's a small amount, like $25,000, we can go out 5 years or 6 years. So it doesn't have to be borrowed for 20 or 30 years.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Just on the plan, Tony, correct me if I'm wrong, but the airport affiliated ones, those are for the post-construction monitoring and the environmental assessment. I think those are state and federal supported projects as well, and these represent Norwood's contribution, probably in the vicinity of 5% of total costs.
Generally, yes. Almost all airport capital projects are 95% funded by the FAA and MassDOT. So those are projects where it's not, they're grants, but it's sort of, you're going to do this, you're going to get the money. So when we either borrow or appropriate free cash for those, it's usually our portion, unless there's a project that we end up having to take on our own.
Comments, questions? Alan, Judy, Kelly? Ann, anything else? All right, then that ends discussion on the capital improvement plan.
Would you like me to,
what is the will of the? I'm sorry, someone.
So would you like to take the capital plan up and then separately go to the infrastructure plan, or would you like me to go through that and then take it all together?
Well, let me just ask this, because Alan's point earlier. Alan, I think your initial observation was that perhaps we could go through the CPI, and that would allow the school department to school representatives to leave the meeting, because I don't believe we need to keep the school folks on board if we're going to be delving into a lot of detail about the infrastructure program. So with that, I thought perhaps we would just, at this point, consider a vote on the capital outlay CIP program and then proceed to infrastructure. Commissioners, is that yes, Alan?
I was going to say that I'd like to make a motion to approve the capital improvement plan for a total of $7,543,000.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Judy. Any further discussion before we proceed to vote? I will go to roll call now. Going to do it in the reverse order that I've been doing it. So I'll first go to Kelly.
Yes.
Alan,
Yes.
Judy,
Yes,
Ann,
Yes.
and the chair votes as well affirmatively. That's 5-0. To the representatives, to Maev, Teresa, and Dr. Daves, thank you for hanging in there. But you are free to leave now, because I don't believe the infrastructure program is going to be one that you'll have a lot of you don't have a lot vested in it. You do as a citizen, but perhaps not as a school department and committee.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night. All right, with that, on to the discussion of the capital outlay, the infrastructure improvement plan. This is a total of $7.3 million. Funding sources borrowing, and this is associated with the road repair program enhancement, or the infrastructure improvement, as well as the water improvement programs. So, Tony, it's you have the chart on screen. So, if you could give us the overview of the two main items associated with this article.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last year, we began to try to look at our infrastructure and project out what was needed to really make sure we were maintaining our infrastructure adequately, and in some cases getting caught up after years of investment not matching what was needed. So there's two components that we're looking at, one being the road repair program. We've done well in the last several years in adding additional funds to road repair. We're still nowhere near where I think we'd like to be. As I always say, there are some towns that do next to no road repair annually. There are some towns, Braintree, which is a good comparable community for us, spends twice as much annually on roads as we do. So with the override, with our Chapter 90 money, which may change after the census, in our general fund election, we're doing okay at $1.6 million a year. That's not a bad amount. If we could get caught up and add a little to that, we think we can maintain ourselves in a good position. What's happening with our road money is the mini roads that need to get done much more frequently than some of the smaller roads end up eating up an enormous amount of that cost. So we know every time we do Washington Street, everyone says, geez, you're doing Washington Street again, but you've never done my road. A good residential road, a typical subdivision that's not too busy can get 30 or 40 years if it's done well before you have to use it again, before you have to do it again. The problem is we're not getting to some of those roads in our plan, and we're almost never going to be able to get to some of those roads. So the idea was an average of a $2.8 million borrowing 5 years in a row, and all we're getting approval for is 1 year at a time. So it's a plan that if we can do this amount of road work plus our budget allocation for 5 years, we will be in a position where that 1.6 million adjusted for inflation should be able to keep us in our roads in good shape for the foreseeable future, certainly for the life of these bonds. And then we might be able to look when these bonds get paid over and say, okay, have we fallen a little bit behind? Is it time to do a little bit of catch up? Of course, we're looking decades down the road, so we don't know what Chapter 90 is going to look like, what other road funds may or may not become available for items like this. So it'll let us get to a lot of the smaller roads. And if you'll give me just, I almost left the meeting on accident. If you'll give me just a second, I do have here the projected road list for that amount of money. And that 2.8 million is all inclusive. It does include all the project oversight and management costs that would be required. And give me just a second here. I'll have your list up. It does mean we're going to be tearing the town up a little bit for quite a while, but usually people are frustrated with a road. Actually, I'll show you two things. If I could take back control of the screen. So many of you have seen this before. This is our annual road resurfacing plan. We project out a few years, everything that needs to get done. We project in a cost. And as you go down, you'll notice that these costs add up quite a bit for what you need to end up doing. And if you'll notice down here, what we're projected out at is really what we have to spend. But a couple of examples in a given year, so this is projected out next year, Washington Street, just from Short Street to Mylod Street, is $300,000. And then Milo Street to the Walpole Town Line, another $300,000. So some of these larger projects just such an enormous portion of our road work that we're never able to actually get to some of the smaller roads. And if you give me just one more moment, I'll be able to see if I can pull up. I should have it here. I'd like to actually show you the list of what we think will get done in year one. If I don't end up having that, and of course, I'm not able to pull it up in my email, but it will be about an additional $2.8 million worth of road work in engineering and design. I think as the Finance Commission knows, we generally try to get the best bang for the buck when we're doing our.
Tony, you faded out. You're on mute.
muted yourself.
Oh, sorry. As you know, every year with our road work, we try to get the best bang for our buck, and we also try to balance what needs to get done versus what the winter did versus how bad a road is in terms of its overall condition. So in short, that's the road repair program. The water improvement program was born out of looking at our annual water lining project, where we're attempting to line our water pipes. And Mark had said it for years that we're on about a 35-year plan to get all of our lines, all of our water pipes lined. And at the rate that we're going, by the time we finish at the little low interest loan we did, and we did do an additional loan last year, we're almost never going to get there and not really going to get any life out of the water pipes. Now, I believe everyone's seen this before, but I'll share my, go back to stopping to share my screen. If you've seen this, this is what a lined water pipe looks like. So after we've done water lining, this is what they look like. When they're not lined, this is what they look like. Now, there's no health risk, but a lined water pipe does provide quite a few benefits. One, it's reduced leakage. Two, it's increased flow to your house, which everyone enjoys. Three, the big safety benefit is increased fire flows, as well as an increased life of the actual pipe in the likelihood that there's going to be fewer breakages and less breakages. So at the pace that we're going, we're 35 years. This plan would be to complete the water improvement program in 10 years. So it would be 10 separate borrowings. They would be 30-year notes because it is water infrastructure, which you can borrow out for 30 years. And often they last 40, 50, or even longer, which would be great. The bonds would peak obviously in year 10 and then begin slowly dropping back off of that. It is, of course, paid for through water rates, as everything we pay for out of water and sewer is paid for through water and sewer rates. We originally were looking to try to be very aggressive and do it in 5 years. The cost of doing the borrowing over 5 years would have been a very big impact on the rates. We then thought about 7. We thought we could maybe make 7 work, but that plus the road work is an awful lot of work to get done in that period of time. So we finally settled on 10 seems to be the sweet spot, that when we complete year 10's project, our 100% of the pipes in Norwood will be lined. We won't have the pressure issues. We won't have the fire flow issues that we occasionally face. You won't have the turbidity in the water where it is a little discolored. So the average impact on the rates is, depending on how you want to look at it, a few percent per year. I know we get the question. I believe I still owe the Finance Commission a copy of a rate analysis we did. What's the average impact on a ratepayer? I would say 2.5% to 3%. I like to be a little conservative. You need to look at your bottom line bill and add that to your bill, because there's a statistical mean of a water bill of around $90 to $100. But if you go down a street where most of the houses appear to be the same, it's $40, $80, $160, $300, $40, $70. So it really is about the usage. What we find is the typical elderly couple living together, or one person living by themselves, probably a $40 or $50 water bill a month. Families that irrigate, that have a pool, tend to see much higher bills. A family of 4 or 5 might be in that statistical mean of about $100 a month. Families living in rental units, incidentally, 3 units or less, you're looking at about $70 or $80 a month, which is interesting that a larger house, largely likely because of the lawn, the same 4 people versus 6 people would use more water. But it's a matter of investing in our infrastructure. We're looking to do it. We want to at least be caught up. We know we'll never be, you're almost never ahead of your infrastructure, but we don't want to fall behind. And when you let some of these systems decline and fall behind, you end up never being able to catch up. Now, similar to the road repair project, the water bond is scheduled to be 10 separate borrowings, 1 per year. There's a couple of reasons we're doing that. One is the amount of time it would actually take to get the project done. Even if we borrowed everything all on day one, we simply wouldn't get it done for a reasonable period of time. And two, our water rates are subject to changes in the MWRA. So we wanted to build in that flexibility because we had initially considered, well, why don't we just do a big bond and do as much work as we can? But our water rates are subject to the MWRA sometimes going up or down. Now, obviously, if it goes down, that could work to our benefit. New communities coming onto the system spreads it out. That's very good. But sometimes a community can go through a major lining project and then we effectively get screwed because their water usage is much less and then the rates go up. And as well as Boston tends to, they're about 40% of the system. So major changes in Boston can sometimes cause the rest of the system to have an issue. So we wanted to make sure we looked at it every year and saw where we were going to make sure we could balance it with a otherwise ordinary rate increase, look at the picture as a whole, decide are we doing too much, doing too little, and that way we could take a pause if we needed to. If we had a year where rates went up too much because of an issue with the MWRA, we could say hold a year, hold 2 years, hold 3 years, and then re-begin the plan going forward. The road repair program is on the debt service schedule, paid out of the general fund, and then the water program, as I mentioned, is paid out of rates as all water and sewer expenses are.
I believe, Ann, you had a question? Then I'll go
Yeah.
to Kelly.
Okay. These are fairly large construction projects that you're planning on doing. And I actually, I spoke the last time about this, that I spoke to Mark Ryan for quite a while and asked him as many questions as I could think of. The one thing that I did not bring up with him is with doing this amount of work every year for the next 10 years, are we going to need, or will that department, the DPW, need to have maybe an extra engineer or somebody that would help
Absolutely.
with this project?
Absolutely. We've built into the costs into both of the bonds project management. We'll absolutely need a project manager for this. It's a
Okay.
question of whether we would do it in-house or do it out-house. Whether we would hire somebody out for it. It used to be that it would say, oh, just pay whatever company, is doing the project extra dollars and we'd hire the equivalent of an OPM. But I got to tell you, those costs are no longer, they're no longer adequate. So we turn around and do we pay an engineer in-house if we have somebody in-house or we hire our own employee? If the salary and benefits of that position is $160,000, do we do that, or do we turn it over to some company and pay them for the oversight at certainly $200,000 or $300,000 for the amount of work we're doing? I would probably rather go in-house. It's going to be dependent on the talent. If we hire somebody, I'd feel more comfortable having somebody working for the town because it is going to be a lot of work. We're going to need one central person to really oversee this. I mean, Mark Ryan is our DPW director and town engineer, does that, but I sort of need a person to go to for this amount of construction. Because remember that we'd also be doing the $1.6 million in water work, in road work on top of the borrowing. So it's a lot of construction work. There needs to be a full-time project manager, but it would be there for the life of the project, whether we hire a company out to do it or we do it in-house. But absolutely, we wanted to be very conservative. The actual numbers for road work are 2.5 million. And we said we need project management costs and we need a good conservative overlay on that. Same thing with the water. We would be doing the MWRA zero interest loan as well. We need to make sure we're covering all of our bases. We're not just going to hire a contractor and say, here, set them loose on town with, $4.5 million worth of water work, and then hope that the desk staff at the DPW can answer any of the questions that people have. It's going to be a big undertaking, but we feel confident we can handle it.
So it's one person for the water and one person for the roads?
No, we're thinking one person can oversee both projects because remember, the DPW is still involved. We still have engineering. We still have the foreman, the assistant superintendent, the business manager, the director. So this would be sort of a project manager whose responsibility is all of our infrastructure work that now falls on a day-to-day basis to one specific person.
Kelly, you had a question. Then Judy.
Yes, I do. I have two now based on what Ann said. But my first question is, I'm all for infrastructure improvements, road improvements. I'm all for water lining. I think that's all great. We need to invest in our town. The water lining I'm less concerned with because if the rates will bear it and people aren't are okay with it, then that's okay. I am concerned with the state of things going on with COVID and with no end in sight in this, us taking on additional borrowing this year or this coming fiscal year to add additional road work to the plan. That's really concerning to me because we really don't have any idea of when this is going to end and what other money will be needed. And this again is money that we're borrowing that's taking away from other items, could take away from free cash next year. We might need that to even balance our budget. So I am concerned. I think it's a great idea. I'm very concerned with putting it in play during a pandemic.
David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tony knows this. I've been touting the issue for a couple weeks now. So I am concerned about the water rates. In the first capital plan, $2.5 million is related to water rates. And in this plan, the 4.5 million is related to water rates. That's a big burden on top of the normal water rate increase that we save annually. I am not opposed to it. What I am concerned about is taking the longer picture view of all the major type of projects. We're tackling them as they come along. I mean, a big part of what we also want to do in the very near future is there's a lot of the Meadowbrook project that we have to complete that's going to cost millions and millions of dollars. I know there is a possible different way of funding it, but my point is I think we need to take a longer view of a lot of the major projects. We have the middle school coming up. We have all these projects lined up. So, I'm talking about major ones. We know town hall is not going to be $600,000. It's going to be multiple millions of dollars to do it the right way. And at some point, we have to tackle the elementary schools. That was identified with over $45 million, and that was a few years ago of work. And what the school department needs to try to decide with the town and with facilities is what they want to do. So I'm not opposed to what's going on. I'm trying to advocate for also looking at long-term projects so we can prioritize what we can afford and how we're going to pay for all these. Because while we're pushing these in the 1 or 2 years that we've identified the needs that Tony has done a good job on, that doesn't necessarily translate to the major stuff that's going to come up next year or the year after. And I think Alan brought up, or Judy brought up earlier about we can't strap ourselves so that we can't handle some of the necessities that will come up in a few years. And I'm not saying we have at this point, but there are a lot of other major projects that are going to come up. And I think at some point we need to have, whether it's done through the capital outlay or to the Board of Selectmen, a long-term view of some of the major projects that we may want to complete or identify for completion over the next 10 years. Not that they will be done in 10 years, but coming up with a major list and then work off that. But overall, I do support this, but I am concerned about the water rates. Thank you.
Judy, did I see your hand up?
Yes. I'm back to the construction again, and it all looks just great, wonderful. But this year, it seemed every time I went around a corner, I was running into construction. I would have to detour here, detour there. And if we're going to speed that up a bit, I might as well just stay home and not go because it won't get anywhere. It'll be too much construction going on. But I'm sure you've taken that into consideration. I mean, it is nice to see. It's nice to be putting money back into the economy. But again, I also agree with the others regarding, the future and some of the big projects. And, we know what the cost will be for the next 5 years, but it's going to spike again with the projects coming up. So that's all I wanted to say. I mean, I am supportive of this. I just kind of have a bad feeling. Well, really not a bad feeling, but an uneasy feeling that we may not be able to afford in the future the other things that are coming down the line.
Yes, Tony.
Just one thing. So full disclosure, traffic will stink the more road and water work we do. There's no way getting around that. One of the things we're trying to do with this, as well as aligning capital to the fall, is to be able to prepare over the winter, go out to bid, get bids in, and then actually start the construction season a little bit earlier. One of the problems we've had is we get an appropriation from town meeting in May, and then we're rushing to start later in the year, and we've missed 2 months of construction, and we're jamming it. And as you know, people last year were not happy, and it might happen again this year. There were temporary water lines across their driveways in November when snow started to fall. We don't want that to happen. So the idea of doing capital in the fall in the future will let us take the full construction season, which it'll be better for bidding. It'll be better for construction. It'll be better for detours, rather than getting projects started in July and then just rushing to try to get as much done as we can and yelling at the contractors every day that they're not keeping up. So there'll be traffic as a result of this, but having the full construction season will make it a little bit easier.
Alan,
Thank you.
please.
Thanks, Bob. Just to comment on something Tony had brought up earlier, that's on additional project management for both the road work and for the water improvement work. I mean, I agree completely. That's something you need. I mean, experience has shown me that if you don't have somebody on staff or you've hired who you can trust, who actually goes out to the projects, looks at them, the contractor knows you're there. I mean, that's really critical. And, whatever money we spend on that, I think is going to be money well spent. I mean, I'll leave it up to Tony and Mark Ryan to determine the best way to do that. But I think it's critical. I mean, I repeat myself, critical that we have some proper project management, during the course of those projects.
We agree.
Mhm.
We agree. And we want one management level individual responsible for what's going on. That way it's not on Tuesday we get a call that, hey, my road's blocked off and my water's not working. What do I do? And it's like, oh, geez, well, Mark's on vacation. Let me go find the assistant superintendent, and Joe Gerard is looking at a sewer project down here. There's a person who's going to be assigned to this project as the project manager that's going to be able to hold us all accountable.
I guess one of the advantages to the both plans that you've put forward, that they do require a 1-year vote, and that we would be back next year for the second year. And by doing that, it does kind of allow us a little time, perhaps, to David's point about prioritizing our projects, but it also means that if we're sitting here a year from now and our financial situation is different or drastically different, or not as, well, I shouldn't say as positive as it is today, because we're not greatly positive. But if our financial situation is such that the projects look a little more difficult to put on, we have the opportunity to modify or to slow them down if we need to. So I see that as probably an advantage over taking a 5-year program and put it all into one borrowing. So I appreciate that. Are there any other comments about the plan, the infrastructure plan?
I have none.
Ann?
I was happy to hear about the management. Thank you. I, sort of panicked, and I thought to myself, oh, those poor people down there that would be tearing their hair out with all of this going on. But I do, I am concerned again about our borrowing. The only, and I'm still on the fence here, the only reason that I would support this would be because we are looking at it on a yearly basis. But I'm telling you, as much as I understand that we need it, and I hate riding from the Walpole line down through South Norwood because my teeth chatter all the way down that hill, and so many other places. I just,
My neighborhood.
I'm having a hard time with this borrowing. I really, I don't know. Just starting it this year. I just think it's a tough time to do it. That's all.
Judy had her hand up.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking, and there's a lot of money on the table here. And I'm assuming, and we did receive the new 5-year projections on budget. And we still have an agreement with the voters that we won't be going back to them in 5 years. And I'm assuming that this borrowing is not going to affect that and say, whoops, all right, now we've got to go back and ask for more. I assume, Tony, from the plan, that should not have an impact on that.
That's correct, Judy. And it's, you're absolutely right. It's a plan. And as I think either Ann or Bob had said, if we were looking at $15 million worth of road work today as a borrowing, that's a substantial impact in 1 year on the budget. Same thing with $45 million worth of water work. We've broken it up into sort of smaller to swallow bites to give us that flexibility. $2.8 million of road borrowing is not going to make a substantial impact on the budget. $2.8 million each year for 5 years, that's an impact on the budget. As is $4.5 million of water rates is not a substantial impact on the water rates, except doing that 10 times in a row, of course, has an impact on the water rates. So by breaking it up, the goal is that we have that flexibility, that every year it can be looked at and sort of balance with everything else that's going on.
Kelly, please.
So I'm just going to reiterate what Ann said, because I agree. I mean, I don't materially disagree with this plan. I think it's a good idea. I do not think this year is the year to start it. I think we need to see how we come out of COVID and what those expenses will be and what the impacts of our budget can be before we take on this amount of significant borrowing. Again, I support this. I just don't think now's the right time.
Well, if we have the ability to go in and change it, it's town meeting, I assume, Bob, you mentioned that, then we would be able to react and make some changes, correct?
Not after we approve it, right? If we approve it, it's done.
Well, you're approving 1 year.
We could do it. Right, exactly. And this is probably the most important year from a financial perspective in terms of impact from COVID, right? So that's my concern. Again, I support more road work. I support more water work. I support all of it. But I just don't think this year is the right time to start it.
I would,
Once we agree, it's committed.
yeah. I mean, I think I think the finances, it is a tough year, but I believe, you know, in this particular year, given what we anticipate for free cash, given the amount of money we've been able to reserve, and even during this particular year to reserve into whether it's our 2.5 override stabilization fund and our regular stabilization fund, I think we're doing a good job, and I think we have the reserves that can take us through this year. But I see your point. It is a wild card year for a lot of things. We keep hoping.
And I respect that too, Bob. I respect that position too,
Yeah.
for sure. It is true. We're doing better than expected. We have a lot of free cash. I would rather see us save that free cash if we need it next year to balance our budget so we don't have significant cut in town and school services. That's my concern. And I think waiting a year isn't going to kill us. That's just my opinion.
Right. And the plan is to reserve a good amount of that free cash to supplement any losses that we think we may have over the next year or so in particular state, but also our local receipts as well. So I guess it's in some respects a little bit of a leap of faith, but I hear that. Judy had her hand up.
Yeah, this probably is for Mark. Mark, if we went out and borrowed all this money, would you be borrowing it in this fiscal year or next fiscal year? Probably for next fiscal year, right?
So if this is authorized in November, they'll go out and get some bids. They'll plan it. They'll get ready to go. They'll need funding possibly in early spring, if that's if
Okay,
they're ready.
my question then, if that's true,
It
when
could be.
would we be making the first payment on that borrowing? It'd be the following year, wouldn't it? It wouldn't be next year.
If we borrow it long-term, it would be next year, yes. So if we borrow in the spring of 2021, we would have a principal and interest payment due in 2022.
I thought with the borrowing, you do not pay anything in the year that you borrow. It's the following year.
Right, that's what he said.
That's pretty. So if we borrowed in March, let's say we borrowed in March of 2021, there would be
Yes.
an interest payment in 6 months and a principal and interest payment in a year.
So that would give us an opportunity not to be paying that amount of money that year, so that the first payments would be in 22, 23.
Correct. Yeah, and
So
if we
Kelly,
did, we could push it out the principal and interest payment another year.
So it wouldn't be as immediate payments, like Kelly is saying. We still don't know what this next year is going to bring with the COVID-19.
Correct. The only thing to think about here, our interest rates are just so low right now, and we know what we have now. So, we'd have to give some thought to that.
Alan, and then Ann.
Thanks, Bob. I think the thing that we have to really consider here is that today, or this town meeting, we're not really approving a multi-year program. We are approving a one-year program, which, may or may not turn into a multi-year program. And that goes to the point that, Ann has made and Kelly has made, is that, I would be concerned if we were having a 5-year road program and appropriating, $14-15 million at one point. That'd be a real concern. But I think that for a one-year program, we can handle that. I don't think that that's going to, kill the budget if we have to have the debt service related to a one-year road program. And at this time next year, we could look at things and decide, do we really want to continue with things going well? Then maybe we will. If things aren't going as well, then we can defer the program into subsequent years. So again, I think the real key to this is the fact that we're only approving this on a yearly basis, and we're not approving huge amounts of money that we're obligated to spend, even in situations where our financial position may not be what we'd like it to be.
So we'll have multiple borrowings over multiple years. So this $14.8 million will be scattered over every year? Or are you saying, no, this is an authorization, we've got a big pool of money, and then we'll draw on it? How is that going to work?
I
think what I was saying, Judy, is that, as I understand that the road program is a 5-year program. So all we're doing is on a yearly basis, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tony, is that we're only approving $2.8 million in this first year. Next
Correct.
year, we may decide we don't want to go ahead with anything. We're not obligated to spend another $2.8 million, a year from now and 2 years from now, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The same thing with the water bond. We're only approving it on a one-year basis.
So we're only going to borrow $2.8 million this year.
Correct.
That's my understanding.
For the roads, and then 4.5 for the water. So it's two separate borrowings for two separate projects.
Two separate borrowings, but they're not going to be due for payment next fiscal year, correct, Mark?
There's an interest payment.
There's an interest payment for sure.
Well, that's if we're doing a band.
Well, if we do a long-term borrowing in the spring, there would be an interest and a principal payment due in 2022.
Right.
One thing to note is the total year one debt service cost of both of these items is less than the cash we're putting into the bank this year, even if you subtract out the free cash we're using to balance the budget. So we're putting $1.6 million into different reserve funds this year, $425,000 into stabilization, $500,000 catch up into the pension, and $750,000 into override stabilization. So your annual debt service of both of these is less than that, even if you subtract out the $600,000 in free cash. So we're dumping $1.6 million into the bank, and even if you take out the free cash that we're taking out, we're dumping $1 million into the bank.
But we're asking town meeting to approve $14,843,000,000 as an authorization only, but we will not be borrowing all that at once, so it will not hit us all at once for the payment back, correct?
Correct. You don't borrow the entire amount on day one and start paying right on day one. It's as the projects are ready and available.
And the earliest we would be paying anything on these are FY22. Right, Mark? A
Correct.
year from. So hopefully the COVID and all that is gone. You know, we're coming around the corner, gang. Haha. So if we do get some improvement with the coronavirus and the economy gets back, we do have some leeway.
Hello?
And, yeah,
Actually, I was going to say something different, but something that Judy said hit me. What do we have coming off of our debt?
I know 23 and 24 both have substantial debt service payments coming off. I'm not sure about 22 because you're always looking at 22 in the context of what you're borrowing. The numbers would otherwise go down. And 24 is when the big light department bond comes off. So that's about a $5 million payment that comes off in 24.
But that is also the year that we're going to be start probably borrowing. Yeah, I know, a debt exclusion, but it's still money out of people's pockets for the junior high. No, I'm sorry, middle school.
in FY24.
24, maybe, Alan?
The schedule for the project is that it will be completed in the year 2025. We would go to town meeting in the spring of 22 to vote the money. So it's just a matter at that point, Mark could probably answer better than me, when we go out for long-term borrowing versus we go out for bans.
So the 5 million coming off the debt will be replaced by that.
Yes, very definitely.
So we're not getting any advantage on that.
I would note that with the Coakley Middle School, that will be a ban for a few years because the MSBA reimbursement will be unknown. So we will not be permanently financing that until MSBA money settles out and we know what our real number is. So long-term borrowing could be out, up to maybe 8 years from now.
Wow.
If we're starting construction in 5, we'll have some time before we permanently borrow that.
Okay. Thank you.
Kelly, please.
So I just want to say one more thing that I forgot. I think Mr. Selectman Hajar also raised a good point about the water rates and the impact on the taxpayers. I think that's also something to consider, but it's also something that town meeting will vote on. And so they'll vote to approve it, right? So that's fine. I appreciate everyone's arguments. I think everyone's positions are sound. I can see both sides I could see a very intelligent argument for both sides. So I don't feel the need to have to debate anymore. I don't think my position is going to change no matter what debate we have. I just want everyone to know that I respect their positions. They're all very well thought out. Thank you.
Okay. Any other commentary, questions? David, please.
I just wanted to clarify for Kelly, town meeting doesn't vote on water rates.
Okay, so that is a little concerning. I can see your concern. I didn't even think of it from that perspective, Mr. Hajar. So that's an interesting perspective for sure.
Very well. What is at this point, we have had a thorough discussion regarding the plan. What is the wish of the commission at this point?
Are you looking for you're looking for how much of an emotion here on the infrastructure, the 7,300,000, the 73.
Yes, I think at this point, we, the last item on the agenda for town meeting number 2 is the capital outlay, the infrastructure plan at 7.3 million. So my
Okay.
question to the commission is, are we at a point now where you want to take a position on this particular article?
I would like to make a motion for $7.3 million for the capital outlay infrastructure program.
Second,
We have a second from Alan.
Second.
Judy put forward the, thank you, Alan. Thank you, Judy. Any further discussion? Very well. Seeing none, we'll proceed to a vote. I'll do the roll call now. Please indicate yes or no on the infrastructure article. Alan Slater,
yes.
Ann Haley,
No.
okay. Judy Langone,
Yes,
Kelly Numi,
No.
okay. The chair votes yes, so it will pass 3-2. If I did my math correctly, I think I did.
I hope there's still 5 of us.
Brought my
It might
calculator.
not be for long, Kelly.
Well, Bob, we're talking about 7.3 million. I hope you did your math right.
Thank you, everyone, for a really rigorous discussion. So at this point, we have voted for the major articles associated with meeting number 2. We still need to vote on the articles from the first meeting. I don't know if Emily or Tony can just put those items up there for review.
Yeah, if you give me one moment.
No problem. You can even take 2 moments, Tony. We're flexible. There you go.
All right, so we have completed these 3 items here. So these are the articles that we have identified with a financial component for this town meeting. Would you like me to go through them in individually, together? How would you like to do it?
Sure. Let me ask the commission. I know we've talked a little bit about them at the previous meeting, and I don't know if folks had a chance to review the yellow sheets that were distributed earlier today. What is the wish of the commission? Do you want to have a little detail item by item?
do I assume, Tony, these will come before the group? You're having a Q&A session, 2 sessions. You will be talking about these in more detail.
Yes. The yellow sheets are also posted on the town's website. They're being mailed out. They probably went out in today's mail or maybe technically tomorrow's mail. So they are on the website. We will be doing 2 info sessions, and they'll be getting mailed out to town meeting members as well.
I don't think we need a full presentation on these for ourselves. If anybody has any questions on each one, we can ask it, but I'm good to go to vote on them.
Okay.
I second Judy.
Okay. So Judy made a motion to approve and I'll name
Article
them.
8,
Article 8 for Community Preservation Fund. Do you want to vote article by one by one on these, and then or all as a whole?
We usually do them one by one.
One by one.
And then we can ask questions. If anyone has a question, they can ask while we're voting.
Yes. Thank you for the reminder. I'm still kind of new at this, you know.
You're doing a great job.
Mr. Donnelly. You're doing awesome.
So Judy has made a motion to preserve the Community Preservation Fund projects in an amount of $175,025. The funding source is CPA fund. Judy has made the motion. Kelly has seconded it, and I will now go to vote. Ann Haley,
Yes.
Alan Slater,
Yes.
Judy Langone,
Yes,
Kelly Numi,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes as well. The next item is number 9, civic elevator. Do I have a motion for the civic elevator additional funds?
So moved.
second,
Is there any discussion on the project associated with the civic elevator.
One question.
Yes, Judy.
What's the estimated time it will be finished and in service?
So we actually opened bids on November 11th. If the construction is similar to the town hall elevator, it'll probably be a 4 to 6 week construction period.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion before we move to a roll call? Seeing none, I'll go to the roll call. I'll call the roll now. Judy Langone,
Yes.
Alan Slater,
Yes.
Ann Haley,
Yes.
Kelly Numi.
Yes, and thank you for always calling me last so I don't get confused.
I'm going in order of my screen. And the chair votes yes as well. The next item is the reimbursement cemetery perpetual care fund. This is an item of $162,481. This is also from free cash. Do I have a motion for the cemetery care fund?
So moved.
So, second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. Judy Langone,
Yes.
Alan Slater,
Yes.
Ann Haley,
Yes.
Kelly Numi.
Yes,
All right, Kelly, I'm not going to surprise you with get you out of order here. We'll keep going.
please don't. It's very late for me.
The next item is the appropriation to the transportation infrastructure funds of $19,273. Tony, I believe this is for the proposed new trail at the Hawes, and the funding source is indicated Uber funds.
That is correct. We
Okay.
just briefly, these are funds we receive every year from a state tax imposed on Uber. They have to be appropriated and can be used for transportation related items. Starting this year and going into next year, we could accumulate the funds if we wanted to, which in the past you couldn't. But as a result of COVID, I don't expect too many Ubers unless the charge applies to Uber Eats, which I'm not sure it does, to be happening. So this will probably drop precipitously as an amount, and we'll probably continue to do bike racks or small trails or something like that.
Very good. May I have a motion for the appropriation of $19,273 from the Transportation Infrastructure Fund?
So moved.
Second.
We have a second from, was that Kelly?
Sure. Yep, that's me.
Okay, very good. We'll proceed to roll call. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to roll call vote. Judy Langone,
Yes.
Alan Slater,
Yes.
Ann Haley,
Yes.
and Kelly Numi.
Yes.
Very well. We now proceed to the next Article 12. This is the classification and compensation study for $165,000. Source of funding is free cash. Do I have a motion for the classification and compensation study?
So moved.
So moved.
So moved.
All right, Ann made the motion. Alan, you seconded?
Sure.
Okay.
Can I say something on the motion?
On the motion, please.
Thank heavens, we're finally doing it.
Any other discussion? So on the motion, I will, it's been offered and seconded. I will now go to roll call. Judy Langone,
Yes.
Alan Slater,
Yes.
Ann Haley,
Yes.
and Kelly Numi,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. The last item is the number 13, the fire department equipment. This is for $156,400. The source is also free cash. Do I have a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Alan seconds it. Thank you. Roll call now. Judy Langone,
Yes.
Alan Slater,
Yes.
Ann Haley,
Yes.
and Kelly Numi.
Yes.
Very well. And at this time, we don't have unpaid bills, but we'll deal with that in the meeting that we'll have prior to meeting. Judy, I see you have a question. Then Kelly?
Yeah, it's not a question so much as a comment, just for the people who are watching or listening to the meeting. Article 8 through 13, which is what we just went through. I want people to realize we didn't have any comments, not because we haven't looked into it. We've been talking about this at our meeting for several meetings, and we're well aware of the details. So I don't want people to think we just went ahead and passed them and said go. So we have been studying them, and we do agree on all the motions. Thank you.
That's right, Judy. We at last meeting we had a significant discussion on all items. I think
correct.
had you.
I did. I had a question, well, kind of an odd question about the meeting before town meeting and town meeting in general. So my question is this. A lot of us don't know what the state of COVID is going to be when town meeting hits. I know if that we continue in the direction that we're in, I'm not going to be able to attend in person, and it doesn't appear that there's going to be another option presented. I don't know if other people on the FinCom have the same situation or circumstances. I don't know. But what happens if we can't get a quorum of FinCom members at town meeting?
I would think maybe for our purposes, Kelly, we at FinCom could probably organize perhaps a go-to meeting remotely as we're doing this evening before town meeting would be one way of doing it. I don't know how other commission members feel, but
so to me, Bob, that begs the question, why isn't there a remote component to town meeting? And that's a whole other discussion we can get into. If we can do our FinCom meetings remotely, why can't we do town meeting remotely or participate remotely? I don't understand it.
So just to address that briefly, the moderator and the selectmen are looking into it. The challenge isn't whether or not we could do it, we physically could do it. It has to do with how state law reads once you've already called a warrant, and that's the challenge. It's not about, there's a process by which you can do a remote town meeting. If you don't go through that process, you are sort of stuck doing what's already been called. So it's being worked on with town council and the moderator, and Bill Plasko's heading up the selectmen's efforts on it, just because of the complexity of how the law states. Unfortunately, to make a meeting remote after it's been called, that meeting would have had to have been before June 30th. And a hybrid model, we've been largely advised against that. The governor's suspension of the open meeting law to allow remote participation in meetings is a suspension of the open meeting law. Town meeting is not actually subject to the open meeting law, so that creates a little challenge. We were advised by bond counsel today that we should in no way attempt any sort of borrowing at a hybrid type meeting unless we get clearance from the AG's office on doing that. And there were one or two other towns out there that said they were doing that. When we let bond counsel know that, they are contacting their towns that are also their clients who are attempting to do that and letting them know that that could cause a problem with their borrowing. So it's not that there's just a desire not to do it. It's the complexity of the way the laws were written and how the state phrased it that just doesn't make it easy to simply make an already called meeting. So it's just, we're dealing with the complexity of the law, that the law is just not as flexible as we'd like it to be.
But you technically could cancel the called meeting and recall it, right?
So there's no legal mechanism to recall a warrant. You can't just cancel a town meeting. They can be postponed for weather-related reasons. We looked into that. That was actually the suggestion of, can the selectmen just recall a warrant? And both the AG and town council said there is no provision in law for recalling or rescinding or removing a warrant once it's been called. And I know that sounds kind of stupid. You think, can't you just undo it? But there's nothing in the law that allows that to happen. The two elements of state law are unfortunately pretty clear about that. Anything we do is sort of skirting a little bit what the law says, because it's very strictly construed. And I wish it wasn't written the way it was. I wish they hadn't put that stupid June 30th date in there. But it's just a complexity, and it's ultimately the selectmen have some say in it. It is ultimately the moderator's decision. It's actually the moderator's decision. The selectmen have to confer, and then town meeting at a meeting has to vote to also be remote while they're remote, which would be hilarious to see if we did it remotely and then town meeting voted not to do it remotely while being remote. But I assume they figured that would probably never actually happen.
That's pretty funny. And the moderator actually contacted me, so I've spoken to him.
Judy, I saw your hand up, Judy.
Yep. I mean, when we look at what's going on right now, the numbers are going off the chart. The numbers are worse than they have been since the beginning. And Tony, we're still in the red zone here in Norwood.
We will be for at least a few more weeks. If you want me to get more into our numbers and what we're seeing, I can, but yes.
Yeah. Well, the point is that there are a lot of us that believe in science, the CDC rules, protocols, and I am one. And as a result of that, I will not be attending town meeting unless I can do a virtual. So I apologize to the public, but I'm sorry, I can't put myself at risk. Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. Ann, yes.
As I have been one of these people that have been in touch with Bill and Mr. Hearns and a few others, and we've been working hard to see what we can do. And some of the things that Tony said today, we're just starting discussion on it. The school department has also been involved in this. So there's many people that have taken up trying to figure out the best and the safest way that we can have our meeting and people can have a choice and feel comfortable in their choice. And that's one of the reasons why I started, and I believe Mrs. Stewart had started these conversations. But we sort of have thought that we'd have, our meeting earlier in the year, and we wouldn't run into a problem with weather or freezing and that sort of thing. And you could have had an outside component to it or whatever, but that didn't happen. And so we're kind of treading water here. But I would like to, can I change the subject a little bit, Mr. Donnelly? Oh, wait, there's somebody else to speak on this.
Yes, but we could do that. And then I'd like to return to, I know we're having a lot of discussion around town meeting, but I would like to return to just organizing a potential FinCom meeting prior to town meeting, just in the event that we need it. But I see David had a comment as well.
It did, and I just want to throw another complication in, and I agree that we need to find a way to get this done. I'm not sure of the exact way to do it just yet. There have been a lot of comments, all positive in trying to find ways to do it, which is great. It is the tax rate, which the bills have to go up by the end of the year. So all of the money articles that you have all been discussing need to be approved, or not approved, but the town assessor needs to know what that final budget number is so that he can develop potential tax rates, which have to get approved by both the selectmen as well as the state. And then bills have to go out by the end of the year. That complicates it. If we had a special town meeting in October, Kelly probably be able to move things in different directions and take our time doing it. We're in a tough spot right now because of the issues on not just the budget, but the tax rate implications. So just wanted to let everyone know there's more than just budget issues of articles and non-budgetary issues that have to be dealt with, but it does have an impact on a major piece of what town government does to get its funding each year. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, Kelly.
Just one more comment. I completely respect what Selectman Hajar just said. It's something we have to get done for sure. It's super, super important. We got to get the tax bills out. And it's nobody's fault that town meeting's been delayed. I mean, it's because of this whole situation that's happening with COVID. It's not. But my concern is from a participation standpoint, from people in the community that have been elected to participate and can't participate in an in-person meeting. It gives the impression, and I know this isn't people's intention, that we're trying to suppress people from participating by not offering a remote option. So I'm glad to hear that so much effort is going into trying to address the concerns that folks like Ms. Haley, myself, Judy have all addressed, Ms. Stewart, and a whole bunch of other people in the community have addressed. I'm glad that so much effort's going into that, because I know that's not what everyone's intention is, but that's how it's being perceived by people in the community. It's important that we all know that as elected officials, so that we can respond to it and make sure that everyone has the opportunity to participate as they were elected to do so.
Very well. Anyone else? So if I may, just back to the votes, if you will, the only reason we would need to convene as a finance commission for the town meeting would be if we have an article for unpaid bills. So I just wanted to talk to everyone about perhaps setting up a time, if needed, to vote on unpaid bills. I do believe we could do it remotely, perhaps during the day on November the 12th, or perhaps November the 10th if we had the information available. Tony, I don't know if November the 10th, that would be Tuesday before town meeting, would we have information available as to whether or not unpaid bills are needed for the town meeting?
Yeah, we should know by then. And right now we're looking at two of them both. Potentially, I think we have two. They're low dollar amounts.
Okay.
One of the things, just briefly, we may want to consider, and I had actually called DOR, is we can, as long as it passes by 9/10, we can craft an unpaid bills line in our budget to pay for unpaid bills from prior years. You make it a couple $1,000s, and you just say it's anything under $1,000 or under $500. So we're not going through an inordinate amount of work to pay, a $280 Verizon bill and a $200, free bill from the prior year. I mean, we are spending more money to pay the small bills than they are.
All right. Judy, did I see your hand up? Did you have a comment, Judy?
No, I was just moving the screen.
Okay. Okay. Alan, please. And then Joanne.
Thanks, Bob. Question to Tony. If in fact we have maybe a couple of bills that are relatively small, and if we wind up, in a difficult time to set up a subsequent meeting to vote on those, I was wondering whether those could be handled out of the reserve fund as opposed to going to town meeting. Not that we want to do that, but worst comes to worst, if we can't meet, whether that would be a viable option. Again, for several bills, which, as you have described them, are relatively small dollars.
We can probably do that.
We should be able to meet.
Yeah, the other thing, just
if there's a problem meeting.
Okay. If there was some reason, we can find a way to take care of it. Usually what our unpaid bills end up being is a vendor we use quite a bit, and one bill just got tapped in, or it's a utility bill that got bounced between 2 months, and accounting just is following the rules when they're making us bring in unpaid bills. So if it's the two bills we think we have, neither are substantial. Even if you didn't meet, the world wouldn't end.
Okay.
There's always May.
But do we have the ability to take a vote to authorize a payment of unpaid bills to an up to number, for example?
Town meeting has to approve it, so you would need to put it in the budget as such, make sure town meeting knows that, and then assuming that particular budget passes by 9/10, it would be just a recurring line every year for unpaid bills. And then the FinCom can sort of informally say, look, make the line $5,000 and no bill over $5,000, or no bill over $1,000, or make it $2,000 and no bill over that amount. And then that way, when we get these, $212 bills, we're not spending $4,000 worth of staff time and FinCom time and town meeting time to try to pay a $200 bill for, staplers that got delivered 2 weeks late or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We'd still bring a big bill if it's a project bill or something like that. You still bring it before town meeting and say, hey, there's a bill from $7,000 last year, it needs to get paid. But again, the amount of effort we spend on a couple $100 worth of bills is costing the taxpayers more money.
Very well. So what is the, Ann, did you have a comment before I move on?
I think because of the discussion we had a little earlier with the school department saying that we'd have a meeting on the day of the town meeting, that I think I sort of locked us into that day. Did I make a promise that I shouldn't have? Oops.
I don't, well,
It sounded like a suggestion to me. And
yeah.
Okay, thanks, Kelly.
I think we with Finance Commission, for the purposes of specific to unpaid bills, we probably want to designate a date and time now that we can get on our calendars, just in case there are unpaid bills. That would be my suggestion. Does that work?
Okay, I'll have a motion here that we meet the day of the town meeting to take care of unpaid bills and anything else that comes up between now and then. Nobody gonna second it? Everybody gonna run away? This is what happens after 9 o'clock, you know.
Let's give everybody a moment here.
Okay.
Now on to come back. I mean, yeah, Kelly, would you be able to attend a meeting briefly sometime prior to 7 p.m. remotely for the FinCom?
For the town meeting, the day of town meeting?
Yes.
Sure.
A noon meeting or something earlier in the day?
I'll figure it out. No big deal.
Okay.
After, if it could be at 3 or later, that's better, but whatever everybody needs to do, just let me know and I'll just figure it out.
So did you pick a time?
How about we say November the 12th at 4
Can we
p.m.?
get a second on that?
Yes.
I second it.
Thank you.
So it's seconded, 4 p.m. on November the 12th. It's been moved and
Perfect.
seconded, and that will be a remote meeting if needed.
Okay,
All right, I'm gonna go an opposite direction now. Kelly knew me?
You had to do that to me at the end of
Yes.
the meeting. Yes.
I'm going counterclockwise now. Judy,
yes.
Ann,
Yes.
Alan,
Yes.
chair votes yes as well. Very well. Thank you, everyone. That takes us through the majority of discussion. We do have just a couple of other items left. Tony, if we could put that sheet back up that you had on there. The next item of discussion is the pink sheet. Or more generally, communication that we want to make to town meeting members prior to the meeting itself.
What we were thinking is we'd send there's a cover sheet that we normally send. We actually haven't done a pink sheet, I think, in 2 years. It's been, I don't know, between the override and COVID, it's been a weird couple of years. We were thinking we would send sort of that cover sheet that lists what the FinCom had voted. We would send this sheet and then just include in it sort of down here, projected free cash. We would include the CPA balances and the balance of perpetual care as well, just so it's sort of our fund balances on there as well.
Don't we usually write a letter on the pink sheet, on one side of the pink sheet, and on the other side is the numbers?
Yep, we have the sort of form letter, if you will, and then this would go on the back.
Okay.
And then we'd probably put the votes in here.
Yeah, if I guess, and that comes from the FinCom. So, Tony, if you could share with me the standard form letter, and if with the commissioners' consent, I'll draft it, make any appropriate modifications in order to get the pink sheet out in a timely manner. I don't think we require a motion or approval on that.
No.
Okay.
It's a good suggestion, Bob. Thank you.
Very well. This one, I know we're having some Q&A sessions coming up here, but the next item is financial update to town meeting. In addition to the Q&A sessions, I know this is also another I know in the springtime, Ann did a financial update. There were some updates that were given by way of video. Is there any need to do that or any consideration being given to that for this round, Tony, in terms of video or any kind of updates?
We are doing some videos. NCM's had a couple of staffing challenges, but we think we're through them. It might be a good idea to do a very brief financial update. We were going to have somebody from the somebody from the school committee or the school department, and myself, and then probably Chairman Plasko. We're going to do sort of a video ahead of town meeting, and it would be better, I think, if you, as the chair of the FinCom, just did sort of an overview, and then the actual explanation of the articles that we're going to do sort of as a video would go much quicker if it's just sort of, here's the big picture, here's where we are. We can put something together for you with a couple slides like we did for Ann last year.
Alan.
Thanks, Bob. I mean, typically, and again, I refer to typically, in the fall, the FinCom has done what we refer to as a state of the town presentation, maybe a 10 to 15 minute presentation, which sort of shows, where we stand, looking at all the various accounts, where we think we're going, what looks good, where we have to be concerned and be watchful for. So it's usually, 10, 15 slides and, 10, 15 minutes. I could, if you're interested, I could share some of the stuff I've done in the past. Tom McQuaid, I know, is the one who's usually helped put them together for us.
Yeah, we did that last year. I do recall that.
Yes.
Yep.
So perhaps we'll take a look at what we did last year, which I still have, and incorporate some of the specifics. Well, I'm recalling on last year we did that, and then we had the pink sheet that was in the slide to do the kind of the overview. In addition to that, we can do, as Tony states, sort of the bigger picture overview as well. All right. Yeah, I will resurrect that PowerPoint and dress it up a little bit for this year. All right, Tony, that's in our ball court to do. Judy, I see you waving.
Yeah, I just want to, the Q&A sessions, Tony, the first one's on the 28th.
Yes.
What time is that?
7 o'clock.
And that can be looked at by remote, right?
Correct. It's going to be a remote sort of Q&A. We'll go briefly
Okay.
through the warrant and give people a chance to ask questions.
And the second one was on the 29th, also at 7 p.m.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Very well. All right. The next item I had put this on there, for the requested information, which I think you got, and I did share it with members. That was just some history on water and utility rate. Is there anything we need to add to that? I mean, we had pretty much a discussion during the infrastructure improvement plan on rates. Is there anything more that you want us to speak to on that particular item?
No, it's okay. I just wanted some information.
Very
That was
good.
it. Thank you.
Very good. So with that,
I have a question.
yes.
I looked at those one pages like this, and it was about as clear as mud to me. I wonder if there's a way it can be broken down that a homeowner could take some kind of a couple of figures and do some multiplication and figure out their own rate, just like we do when we did an override.
I think the information that Tony referenced earlier about the sort of the rate information that was done at David and I think at Ann's request might be more enlightening than the notices that you received. Well,
For instance, this first one, which is July 2020, minimum charge. Everybody gets $6.87, right? I'm talking residential. Then the charges are per CCF. So if I knew how many CCFs I had, and I knew it was $6.87, wouldn't I be able to figure out my bill?
You should be able to. I think what Bob's saying is the easiest way to do it is when we project a rate increase, look at your bottom line bill, because the other complexity is that you get billed for water and sewer. We've always run it as one system. So any
Yeah,
costs
that's
we
true. Yeah.
get borne across the whole system. So if you, like, all of our water and sewer debt, it's one number. So if you look at your bottom line bill, when we project that, let's say it's a 4% increase, assume that dollar amount you pay at the month is what's going to go up 4%. It varies whether it's actual water or sewer. And again, your sewer is 75% of your water, but that's the easiest way to do it. I will make a note. I want to make sure I get you the brief rate analysis we did. It was pretty interesting to see 4 different neighborhoods, just how wildly people use water. And it's largely based on family size, but it's $40, $180, $320, $40, $70, $90, $280. It's kind of wild that it's all over the place.
Well, you know, when it comes to the light bill, you can see how many units there and how many kilowatts and all that. It's easy to figure out your bill. You know, I watch, you know, mine's 5 this month, and in the winter it jumps up to 8 and so forth. You can sort of figure it out. And if it goes a little high, you call down and say, why is this higher than the last 3 years? Something like that. But I understand the complication, what you're saying on the water and sewer.
And we'll still see if we can do that and we can get something out. And I do want to let everyone know, we do have a, you can go on through the light department's website. You can sign up to get your water or electric bill. Not only can you do online billing, you get it emailed to you, but you can get an alert if your usage goes over a certain level. So like I get a little text message every morning that, you know, my average is 8 kilowatt hours a day. And today I used 13.7. And it's a great tool to just, you know, look at what your average is and set it so that way you know if you have a water problem or you know if you have an electric problem. Or I find it fascinating to find out how much electricity your stove actually uses if it's electric, or if you're running your air conditioner and what the difference is.
Yeah, I'm on that. I have been on that website, but I haven't used that particular function, but that would be good.
Very well.
I'm done.
Good. With that, we can proceed. Any other business for this evening that we need to discuss? Ann, yes.
Couple of things. Tony, a question to you. We received a letter about a change in an employee's status, their rate at which they're being paid. Have you got enough money in that account to cover that, or do we need to make a transfer at the special?
Which one are you referring to?
The person who's contract administrator.
Yeah, I believe so, but those are one of the items that as it gets closer towards the end of the year, you look at the adjustment, but we should be all set. Our part-time staff's been a little crazy. There's some money in that budget, and we have some people out with COVID, so I think so. It won't be substantial if we do need to go for money.
Okay. You know, you wouldn't get these questions every year if you did the if you did the personnel changes closer to the time of town meeting of our annual, and we could put it in the annual and start there. But anyway, and the other thing I had was a suggestion about the reserve fund that might affect the town meeting. I was thinking, you know, we were concerned about a lot of different things over the last 6 or 7 or 8, now is it 8 months? Anyway, all of these months that there might be an emergency or something like along those lines. And I personally feel that we've got at least another 6 months to go through this virus. And the assistance from the state and the federal government I see as probably waning a little bit. So I can't believe I am absolutely saying these words, but I'm thinking that we should maybe transfer some money from free cash somehow or someplace and putting it into the reserve fund.
Is that specifically for COVID-related items?
Emergencies, a flood, whoever thought, you know? Yeah, I you know, I'm not real big fan of doing this, but I'm just wondering if, you know, it's easier to get us together than it is obviously to get a town meeting together to pay some bills.
It's not a bad idea if we found a way to do it, that it was a recurring line and, a true emergency, not a reserve fund where, a state of emergency has to be declared and there's some money there. I mean, I guess the other side of that is between the Civil Defense Act and the Deficit Spending Act, you have the authority, but you're right. If we hadn't had CARES Act money, we'd be having a whole different conversation about how we're able to pay for a lot of things. So as much as I'm critical of the Commonwealth on just about everything they do, them choosing to structure the CARES Act money in the way that they did made things a lot easier for us.
So I don't know how you folks feel about this, and if there's something that we can do at this town meeting to transfer some money into the reserve fund that we have control over right now to get us through the rest of the year. No interest? Okay.
Excuse
I
me,
think
right
it
now,
makes sense. I think what you're saying makes sense. I just don't know procedurally how we'll do that.
Yeah, that's the only issue.
It makes complete sense to me, and I mean that's really smart. I mean, you can't reconvene a town meeting every time you have to move $10,000, right? So it makes sense. I just don't procedurally know how it would get done.
So couldn't we we can get it in, that leads me to the other thing. We can get it in under the warrant of the, where we're transferring the one that we have the elevator and the reimbursement of the perpetual. Can we get that in there and under those as a motion?
If you're looking to do it at the special, the warrant's already closed. The yellow sheets have already gone out. A change like that, I think, needs to be brought up at a different meeting.
I thought that the way that Alan had tried to get another article on the warrant, and Bill had said that's for.
There's flexibility there would be flexibility in the language, but at this point, the selectmen have already approved a yellow sheet and taken an action on each item. The Finance Commission just went through a meeting where you've approved different items, different appropriations. To now create something new between now and town meeting, I think would be problematic. And I think the idea has merit looking into. We haven't had a need as of yet to do it. Maybe want us to take a look at a staff level and see where we think we would have used it and what the need would be.
Judy, are you raising your hand?
yes,
Go ahead, Judy.
I'm opposed to doing this. I think we have enough flexibility, especially in the schools that can move money around. I just don't want to look at that we're going to just increase the slush fund and be able to divvy out money when we think there's an emergency. So I'm opposed to it.
I think if we have opportunity, to your point, Ann, if the situation that we're in extends beyond, extends into FY22, I mean, there might be opportunity as we're doing our budget preparation for 22 to consider an adjustment to the reserve fund at that time for that, potential event happening. But it sounds like procedurally it's a tough thing to do now, but it's probably an idea that we could revisit when we're doing budget planning, and perhaps even be able to develop some specific guidance regarding what kind of event that additional money would support in terms of the pandemic spending, if you will. So.
Okay. All right. And I had one other thing. I'm sorry. I keep bringing these things up. The paused spending, that we had put into place, and it said, what was it, December 1st, that it would, that nobody could spend that money up until December 1st. So does that mean we're just going to let this roll into December 1st, or was it December 1st? we're just going to let December 1st come along and that money will be put into those specific accounts? Or do we need to do something at this special to make sure that it does go in, or it goes in a month earlier than what we had wanted it to?
No, if no action's taken at the special, we would, after December 1st, that motion would stand. We would make those deposits.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that we get all that money into those savings accounts, because we'll need them. All right,
Very good.
thank you. I mean,
All
I
right.
think I'm done.
All right. I don't think there's any unless there's anyone else that has any discussion points or comments, I think I'll entertain a
I make that motion.
Second,
well, here, was that a motion to adjourn?
That was a motion to adjourn, yes.
Do I have a second?
Second,
second,
All right.
we're almost as long as the school committee tonight.
I know.
Thank you, Ann.
Roll call vote, Alan Slater,
yes.
Ann Haley,
Yes.
Kelly Newmy,
Had to screw me up, yes.
Judy Langone,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes as well, 5-0. Thank you, everyone.